The fog in Seattle was particularly thick that Friday, but I didn't mind the damp cold. I had spent 2 hours in a high-end grocery store, carefully selecting prime ribeye steaks, imported cheeses, and that expensive red wine my son-in-law Richard loved so much. My bags were heavy, my card had just been approved, and I felt that familiar mix of anxiety and hope. I truly believed that this Sunday dinner would finally be different. I was in the parking lot loading the heavy groceries into the trunk of my 12-year-old SUV, which groaned with every turn of the key. The phone vibrated in my pocket and I saw a message from my daughter, Camilla. I smiled, expecting a thank you, but instead I read, "Mom, about Sunday. I think it is better if you do not come. We are hosting Richard's boss and some big investors. It needs to be a finer event. You understand, right?" I read the word finer 3 times, and each time it felt like a small blade cutting into my spirit. It was as if I were something too coarse to be present in their lives, as if my very existence was an embarrassment to their social climbing. I looked at the bags in my trunk. Over $200 worth of food that no one was going to eat with me. I replied with a simple okay and sat in the driver's seat without even starting the engine. I didn't cry because I had already passed the stage of tears long ago. When you spend years being treated like an inconvenience, like someone who exists only to open their wallet and then vanish, your heart eventually dries up. What remains is a kind of numbness, a deep exhaustion that lives in your bones. I sat there listening to the distant hum of shopping carts and families, wondering how I had become a stranger to my own flesh and blood. I drove home to my modest 2-bedroom apartment in a building that was over 30 years old. The walls needed painting, and the shower made a strange noise, but it was fully paid off. It was mine, and it fit into what was left of my budget after I finished paying for my daughter's and son-in-law's extravagant life. I put the groceries in the fridge, knowing I'd likely be eating that steak alone next week, just like I did every other night. I sat on the old sofa we bought 20 years ago, before my husband died and before everything became this mess. Camilla is 38 years old now. She and Richard live in a beautiful house in a gated community with a pool. They drive brand new cars and travel 4 times a year. Their children attend a private bilingual school. Camilla goes to the gym daily and has perfect nails, while Richard wears watches that cost more than I earn in a year. I, on the other hand, have worn the same 3 pairs of jeans for 5 years. My car is 12 years old and makes a terrifying noise whenever I drive up a hill. I cut my own hair because the salon is too expensive, and I buy the cheapest brands at the store. I haven't traveled since my husband's funeral, but the part that kept me awake that night was the realization of who was actually paying for their finer lifestyle every single month. I went to the small study in my 2nd bedroom, which was really just a closet with an old desk and a metal filing cabinet. I opened the drawer where I kept all the important papers, bank statements, and contracts. I began to make a list, not a vague mental list, but a real one with paper and a blue pen. I needed to see the numbers in ink. I needed to see exactly how much of my life was being drained away to support people who were ashamed of me. I wrote it all down. Their mortgage, $2,800 a month. The gated community fees, $700. The children's tuition, $1,900. Their family health insurance, $1,200. The car payments, $1,400. Then there was Camilla's gym, the country club, Netflix, Spotify, and that monthly wine subscription Richard loved. I kept going down the list, adding up the electricity, the water, the internet, and even their personal trainer. After 3 hours, I looked at the final number at the bottom of the page. My hands were shaking, not from anger yet, but from pure shock. $8,400. That was the amount leaving my account every single month to sustain their life. It had been happening for 15 years, ever since Camilla got married, and I foolishly thought I was just helping them get started. I realized I had given them over $1.5 million in total. I stared at that number until the digits began to lose their meaning. I tried to visualize that money. It could have bought 3 apartments like mine. It could have funded a comfortable retirement, travels, and a life of ease for me. Instead, I was sitting in a cold apartment because I didn't want to spend money on a heater, wearing a frayed sweatshirt after being told I wasn't fine enough for lunch. Something inside me finally snapped that night. It wasn't a loud break, but a silent click, like a dry branch snapping under constant pressure. It was the part of me that still believed love and sacrifice were the same thing. I looked around my apartment at the 10-year-old TV and the faded sofa. I hadn't bought new clothes in 4 years, yet they lived in a house I paid for, drove cars I financed, and ate food I bought while telling me I didn't match the decor. The realization was bitter and cold. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were still trembling, but now it was a cold, calculated rage, the kind that doesn't scream but makes firm decisions. I went back to the desk and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account and saw page after page of scheduled transfers. I counted every single one of them. It took over an hour to find all the hidden automated payments I had set up for them over the long years of their greed. There were 118 different automatic payments holding their entire world together. I looked at the computer screen and felt an absolute clarity. This wasn't just about revenge. It was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you can simply get out of bed. It was nearly 2 a.m., and the bank would open at 9 a.m. I had exactly 7 hours to decide if I would actually go through with it or remain the good invisible mother. I lay in bed, but sleep was impossible. I thought about every time Camilla canceled lunch at the last minute and every birthday party where I was pushed into the background. I remembered last Christmas when I spent it alone because their house would be too crowded with Richard's family. My daughter hadn't asked how I was doing in over a year without needing money first. Every conversation was about what she needed, never about what I felt or wanted. When I finally woke up 3 hours later, my decision was made. The bank was a 15-minute drive away, and I arrived exactly when they were opening the doors at 9 a.m. Carla, the manager, had known me for years and was always warm in a professional way. I walked in and asked to speak with her immediately. I sat in the padded bank chair, watching normal life happen around me while I prepared to detonate a financial bomb in my own family. For a few minutes, I considered leaving and pretending nothing had happened. I wondered if I was being too dramatic or exaggerating the situation, but then I remembered the text message. "I think it's better if you don't come. It has to be something finer." That was the final straw. Carla called me into her office, wearing her usual navy suit. Her professional smile faltered when she saw the look on my face. She knew something was very different today. I sat down and placed my bag on my lap, taking a deep breath. I need to cancel all the automatic payments linked to my daughter's and son-in-law's accounts. Every single one, without exception. Carla's smile vanished completely. She looked at me with a mix of concern and confusion. "All of them, Vera? That is a lot of payments. Are you absolutely sure? This will have a very significant impact on their lives and credit scores immediately." "I know exactly what is going to happen," I replied, my voice steadier than I ever imagined. "And that is exactly why I am here." Carla studied me for a long moment, and I could see in her eyes that she understood. She was around my age, and perhaps she also knew what it felt like to be exhausted by the greed of others. She opened my file on her computer and scrolled through the endless pages of recurring payments, her eyes widening at the scale. "There are 118 recurring payments," she whispered. "Bills will go unpaid, and services will be cut off almost immediately." I told her I understood and wouldn't change my mind. I spent the next hour signing documents, and each signature felt like a weight being lifted off my soul. The mortgage, the cars, the school, the club, everything was gone. When we finished, she gave me copies of everything and confirmed it was effective now. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than I had in 15 years. It was as if I had been carrying a backpack full of stones for a decade and finally had permission to drop it. My shoulders literally felt looser as I drove home. I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I cooked a real lunch for myself, steak, rice, and a fresh salad. I set the table properly and used a cloth napkin, enjoying every single bite without any hurry or guilt. I left my phone in the living room on purpose, knowing what was coming and not wanting to ruin my meal. When I finally checked it, there were 7 missed calls and 15 messages. Camilla was frantic. "Mom, the card was declined at the market. Did you forget to pay? The bank is calling about the mortgage. What is going to happen? Please call me." Then Richard wrote, "Vera, we need to talk. The gated community says the payment bounced. Answer the phone." I read each message with a strange, detached calm. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. The part of me that would have panicked and rushed to fix everything was finally asleep. I put the phone on silent and went to the terrace to read a book in the sun. I couldn't remember the last time I had just sat there doing nothing, enjoying the afternoon without worrying about their bills. It was the most peaceful I had felt in years. Around 5 p.m., there was a loud, urgent pounding on my door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Camilla was standing there, her face red and her eyes full of angry tears. She burst in without an invitation, screaming from the hallway, "Have you lost your mind? What did you do?" The bank called and said all the payments were canceled. The kids' school, the house, everything. How could you do this to us? I just walked back to the sofa and sat down. I didn't offer her coffee or a seat. I just waited for her to stop shouting. "You have to call the bank right now and undo this," she demanded. "No," I said. The word floated in the air, simple, firm, and final. Camilla looked at me as if I had slapped her. "What do you mean, no? We are going to lose our home. We will lose everything." I told her they would have to pay for their own house and assume the costs of the lifestyle they chose to live. "We don't have that kind of money. We depend on your help," she cried. "And that is exactly the problem," I said, walking to the desk. I picked up the list I had made the night before and handed it to her. Camilla looked at the paper, her hands trembling. 118 payments, I said. $8,400 a month for 15 years. "Do you even know how much that adds up to?" She didn't answer, staring at the total in shock. $1.5 million, Camilla. I could have used that money to live my own life, to travel, to have comfort. Instead, I count every cent at the grocery store while you buy imported cheese with my money. She whispered that she was my daughter and that mothers are supposed to help. I agreed, but told her that helping doesn't mean paying for every aspect of a 40-year-old couple's life. You are 38 and Richard is 42. You earn well. "But we built this life based on your money," she screamed. "A lifestyle you cannot afford," I countered. "Yesterday, when you told me I wasn't fine enough for your house, you made a mistake. You have the right to choose your guests, but I have the right to choose how I spend my money. And I decided I will no longer spend it on those who are ashamed of me." Camilla's tears turned from rage into real, mounting panic as the reality of her situation hit her. She sat on the sofa, clutching the list. "Mom, I didn't know it was that much." "I never stopped to think about it." "Exactly," I replied. "You never thought about it." I could see her mind working, calculating, realizing that without my help, they couldn't maintain even half of their current comfort. "What are we going to do?" she asked in a small voice. I told her they would do what all adults do. They would pay their own bills or find a way to live within their means. I suggested they sell the cars for cheaper ones, take the kids out of private school, and sell the big house to rent something smaller. Each suggestion felt like a punch to her. The idea of living like a normal person without unearned luxury was unthinkable to my daughter. "The children will suffer," she said, trying one last emotional appeal. I told her they would learn a valuable lesson, that things cost money and that money must be earned by hard work. She looked at me, stunned. I had never spoken to her like this. I had always been the gentle, compliant mother who absorbed everything. "How can you be so cruel?" she asked. "Cruel?" I repeated, feeling my own anger finally begin to boil. "Cruel is letting you become an adult who cannot support her own family. Cruel is giving you everything and teaching you that you don't need to work for anything. I enabled you for 15 years, and now I am fixing my error." She stood up abruptly and threw the paper at me. "You are going to regret this. When we lose everything, it will be your fault, and I will never forgive you." I told her I could live with that, and she stormed out, slamming the door. I picked up the paper and put it back in the folder. Evidence, proof that I was right. Night fell and my phone kept ringing, but I kept it on silent. I made some tea, watched an old movie, and went to bed early. I slept better than I had in years. The following days were filled with a tense silence. No calls, no messages. It was as if I had died to them, and in a way, the old Vera, the one who paid for everything, actually had. I received a call from my grandchildren's school. The secretary was polite but firm, saying the tuition was late and needed to be settled or the children couldn't attend. I told her I was no longer the financial responsible party and to direct all future billing to Camilla and Richard. There was an awkward silence on the other end. "I understand. I will make a note of that." I hung up and felt a strange satisfaction. It was like cutting the threads that tied me to a life that wasn't mine. The gated community manager called next about the maintenance fee. I told him the same thing. It was no longer my responsibility. It had been a mistake to pay for so long, a mistake I would never make again. I was finally reclaiming my own financial life. 2 weeks passed, and the silence from Camilla was absolute. I imagined the chaos in their house bills arriving, phones ringing, and reality knocking on the door like an insistent collector. I, however, was discovering something surprising. I had extra money. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't counting pennies at the end of the month. I went to the store and bought things I always thought were too expensive, like fresh salmon and good wine, without any guilt. In the checkout line, an elderly woman in front of me was returning items because she didn't have enough money. Her face was red with shame, and I knew that feeling all too well. I stepped forward and paid for her groceries. It was about $30. The smile of gratitude she gave me was worth more than all the thousands I had poured into my daughter's life without ever receiving a sincere thank you. I realized that true generosity feels much better than being used. I went home and gave myself a real luxury. I turned on the heater. I let the apartment get warm and comfortable instead of huddling in blankets to save energy. I sat on the sofa with my wine and salmon dinner, feeling a quiet contentment. It wasn't explosive happiness, but the calm satisfaction of being okay in my own skin and my own life. I was finally starting to live for myself after decades of existing only to serve the ungrateful needs of others. In the third week, my 15-year-old grandson, Lucas, showed up at my door. I was surprised because the children rarely visited me alone. Camilla always had an excuse. He had his school backpack and an uncertain look on his face. "Grandma, can I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart." I offered him juice and cookies. "Mom said you went crazy." He started directly. "She said you canceled everything and we are going to lose the house." I took a deep breath. "I didn't go crazy, Lucas. I just stopped paying for things that aren't my responsibility." He looked at me, processing the information. He was a smart boy. "You were paying for everything? Why?" It was such a simple, direct question, and I didn't have a good answer, because I thought that was what mothers were supposed to do, but I was wrong. He told me his dad was desperate and screaming at his mom all the time, and that they were fighting about money every night. He said his 9-year-old sister Marina was having nightmares. My heart sank. "I'm so sorry you are going through this, Lucas, But your parents are adults with jobs. Their situation isn't my fault. It's theirs for building a life they couldn't afford. He told me they would have to change schools and he would lose his friends. I told him he would make new ones and learn that a person's value isn't in their expensive school or house, but in their character. He sat quietly for a moment. Mom said you are selfish. I told him she could think that, but asked him if it was truly selfish to take care of oneself after years of sacrifice for people who don't value it. He thought for a long time and said, I don't think so. I took his hand and told him I loved them more than anything, but love doesn't mean destroying myself to build their lives. Love means teaching, and sometimes the lessons we need to learn are painful. Lucas nodded slowly. I saw the thoughts moving behind his eyes. He stayed a bit longer, and we talked about school and his friends. He didn't mention the problems at home again. When he left, he gave me a real tight hug, not a forced one. Grandma, you aren't selfish. I just wanted you to know that. I leaned against the door after he left and let the tears fall. They were good tears that cleaned instead of hurting. At least one of them understood. Life went on. I bought some new clothes that made me feel good and finally went to the dentist, something I had postponed for 2 years. I started swimming 3 times a week at the local pool. I was actually living. A month later, Camilla showed up again. She didn't pound on the door this time. She rang the bell and waited. She looked different, thinner, tired, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She asked if she could come in. She entered and stood in the living room like a stranger. We sold the house and the cars, she said. We are renting a smaller apartment nearby. The kids changed schools. They are at a public one now. I just nodded and waited. Lucas seems okay, but Marina is struggling. Richard is not handling it well and took an extra job on the weekends to compensate. I hardly see him. I stayed silent. It wasn't my role to fix their life anymore. You were right, she said, her voice breaking. We were parasites. We didn't know how to do anything ourselves because we never needed to. And now that we do, it's so hard, Mom. She dried her eyes and asked if I wouldn't help even a little bit by reactivating some payments. I said no, softly, but firmly. She nodded as if she expected that answer. She apologized for what she said about me not being fine enough, calling it cruel and unjust. I told her it hurt, that it taught me that I had been letting them treat me badly. She looked so young and vulnerable for a moment that I saw the little girl she used to be. When did you stop loving me? She asked. I told her I never stopped, but that I cut them off because I loved her. Watching her become someone who only knew how to take and never value anything was killing me. And it was killing her too, even if she didn't see it then. She looked at her hands. I thought you were obligated to do it as a mother. I never stopped to think what it cost you. It cost me my dignity and my self-esteem, I told her. I became a money-giving machine that no one respected. She asked how to fix it, and I told her there is no going back, only forward. I told her she would learn to live with what she has and value what she earns. And perhaps in time, she would learn to feel a healthy sense of pride. I told her that in the last 2 months, I had been happier than in the last 15 years. I have money for myself. I do what I want. I don't stay awake worrying about bills that aren't mine. And I respect myself again. I told her she could respect herself too, but only when she earned it by taking care of her own family without crutches. She whispered that she was afraid of failing, and I told her everyone is. But the difference is whether you use fear as fuel. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the clock and the sound of children playing outside. The kids miss you, she said, especially Marina. My heart tightened. I told her they were always welcome, but I would not go back to paying for everything or being their bank. She stood up and asked if I was truly okay. It was the first time in years she asked and really seemed to want to know the answer. I told her I was very well, better than I had been in a long time. The following months were a period of adjustment. Camilla and Richard adapted to their new reality. I heard from the kids that their parents had taken extra jobs. Richard was driving for a rideshare app on weekends, and Camilla started selling handmade jewelry online. It wasn't glamorous, and it was far from their old life, but it was theirs. It was honest and real. Lucas came to visit one afternoon, and we sat on the sofa eating popcorn. He said he hated changing schools at first, but the people there were cool and didn't compare expensive clothes or phones. He said he felt less fake. I smiled. He was learning to see beyond the gilded surface his parents had built. He told me his dad wanted to apologize, but was too proud to come. Lucas asked if I missed how things were before. I told him I missed the children, but I didn't miss that unhealthy dynamic. It wasn't good for anyone. Marina started coming too. She was quieter and more scared of the changes, but she would draw for me and tell stories about her new school. I saw her anxiety slowly decrease as she adapted. One afternoon, she asked if it was true I used to be rich, and now I wasn't. I laughed and asked who told her. She said her mom told her I spent all my money on them. I told her I still have money. I just decided to stop spending it on things that weren't mine. She said her parents were sad, but that they knew it was their fault, not mine. I confirmed it was, but told her they would be okay. People need to go through hard things to learn, I said. She asked if I still loved them, and I told her with all my heart. She smiled and went back to her drawing. I realized children need so little, just presence, attention, and love, not expensive schools and big houses. They just wanted to know they were cared for. 6 months after the day I canceled everything, I got an unexpected call from Carla at the bank. She told me Richard had come in to open a joint account with Camilla and start financial planning. They wanted to learn how to manage money correctly. I felt a warmth in my chest. She said Richard asked her to thank me, saying it was the hardest but most important lesson of his life. When I hung up, I felt a deep sense of recognition and growth. Life continued. I made new friends in my swimming class and joined a book club. I traveled for the first time in years, a simple week at a coastal inn. It was mine, earned with my money and enjoyed on my time. During that trip, sitting on the terrace watching the sunset with a book and wine, I finally felt I deserved it. For so long, I lived as if my only function was to make others comfortable while I withered away in the shadows. I returned from the trip feeling renewed and found an envelope under my door. It was a letter from Camilla. She wrote that she couldn't say it in person yet because of the shame, but that I was right. She admitted they had become terrible people who only knew how to take. They thought it was normal and my duty as a mother, but she realized love isn't about using someone until there is nothing left. She said they had sold everything that they thought mattered. We found out that none of those things really mattered, she wrote. What matters is sitting at the dinner table every night, eating simple soup and talking about our day. It's more real than anything we had before. We are still learning and it's hard, but we are paying our bills, and I feel I deserve what I have because I earned it. I owe you more than I can pay in respect and gratitude. You saved our family by destroying us first. She invited me to dinner, just family this time. I cried tears of relief. It was the recognition I needed, not the money. I responded a few days later, accepting the invitation. I told her she didn't owe me gratitude, but she owed herself and her family respect. I told her I was proud of her for having the courage to change. The dinner was on a Saturday, and I brought a simple homemade cake. Their small apartment was clean and felt like a real home. Richard was in the kitchen cooking. He looked me in the eyes for the first time in years and thanked me for coming. We ate simple food chicken, rice, and beans, and it was delicious because it was made with their own effort. The kids were happy, talking about their new friends. After dinner, Camilla thanked me for not giving up on them. I told her I didn't give up. I just stopped losing myself so they could finally find themselves. Today, when I look back at that day at the bank 2 years ago, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been brave. I'd probably be dead inside, consumed by the stress of being invisible. I made the hardest choice, one that seemed cruel, but was actually the greatest act of love for them and for myself. I learned that my life matters too, and that caring for myself isn't selfish as survival. It is never too late to rescue yourself.